सबको नमस्ते। 2024 विकसित भारत की ओर इस ऑनलाइन परिचर्चा श्रृंखला में आप सभी दोस्तों का हार्दिक अभिनंदन है, तहे दिल से स्वागत है। दोस्तों, 2024 के चुनाव की सरगर्मियां चारों ओर दिखाई देने लगी हैं। एक ओर मोदी जी के नेतृत्व में भारतीय जनता पार्टी की सरकार है, जो अपनी उपलब्धियों के बल पर पूरे आत्मविश्वास के साथ जनता के सम्मुख जाने को तैयार है। दूसरी ओर कांग्रेस समेत तमाम विपक्षी पार्टियां हैं, जो एन केन प्रकारेण सत्ता हासिल करना चाहती हैं। इन सब के बीच जनता है, हम और आप हैं, जो चाहते हैं कि भारत के विकास के हर पहलू का सूक्ष्म मूल्यांकन किया जाए। 2024 विकसित भारत की ओर ऑनलाइन परिचर्चा श्रृंखला इसी उद्देश्य की पूर्ति के लिए किया गया है, जहां हम विषय विशेषज्ञों द्वारा भारत के विकास के हर पहलू, चाहे वह इकोनॉमी हो, एजुकेशन हो, हेल्थ हो, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर हो, अर्बनाइजेशन हो, ईज ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस हो, फॉरेन डायरेक्ट इन्वेस्टमेंट हो, यूथ हो, स्पोर्ट्स हो, कहने का तात्पर्य कि हर पहलू का सूक्ष्म विवेचन विश्लेषण विषय विशेषज्ञों द्वारा यहाँ पर होगा और अंत में प्रतिभागियों के प्रश्नों का उत्तर लिया जाएगा। आज इसी श्रृंखला की पहली कड़ी है भारत इमर्जिंग ऑन द ग्लोबल स्टेज, और आज के इस विषय पे हमारे विषय विशेषज्ञ हैं, स्पीकर्स हैं। बेंगलोर से संजीव निश्चल जी, ग्लासगो यूनिवर्सिटी स्कॉटलैंड से प्रोफेसर अर्जुनन सुब्रमण्यन जी, और न्यूज 18 तथा फर्स्ट पोस्ट के ओपिनियन एडिटर श्री उत्पल कुमार जी। तीनों लोग हम लोगों से जुड़ चुके हैं। मैं आप तीनों स्पीकर्स का अभिनंदन करती हूँ, स्वागत करती हूँ। दोस्तों, पिछले 8-9 वर्षों में वैश्विक परिदृश्य पर भारत की छवि में जो श्री वृद्धि हुई है, भारतीयों का जो गौरव बढ़ा है, उसका तो कहना ही क्या है। इसने हम सभी 140 करोड़ भारतीयों का सिर गर्व से ऊंचा कर दिया है। इस संदर्भ में मेरी स्वरचित कुछ पंक्तियां हैं जो शेयर करना चाहती हूं। देखता है विश्व विस्मय से भारत की ओर देखो, देखता है विश्व विस्मय से भारत की ओर देखो, पूछता है उच्च गौरव के चतुर्दिक फैलने का, पूछता है उच्च गौरव के चतुर्दिक फैलने का, संस्कृति अर्थव्यवस्था के उत्कर्ष का अनुपम समय, संस्कृति अर्थव्यवस्था के उत्कर्ष का अनुपम समय, हर कदम अब बढ़ चले हैं, हर कदम अब बढ़ चले हैं, धन्य भारत, धन्य भारत। परिचर्चा को आगे बढ़ाते हुए मैं रिसर्च स्कॉलर आकांक्षा अग्रहरी से अनुरोध करती हूँ कि हमारे आज के स्पीकर का संक्षिप्त परिचय कराएं।
Dr Arjunan Subramanian, sir, and sir is the reader at University of Glasgow and visiting professor at Giri Institute of Development Studies, Lucknow. Sir is a development economist and has received several awards from World Bank and American Agricultural Economics Association for his research. Sir holds PhD degree from Hohenheim University, Germany. So I'd like to invite Sir to speak.
Thank you, Akansha. Thank you, Poonamji, for inviting me. And I'm an economist by training, so मेरी हिंदी उतनी अच्छी नहीं है, तो इसीलिए मैं इंग्लिश में ही बोलूँगा। बीच बीच में मैं हिंदी भी बोल पाऊँगा, लाइक अमृत काल। So let me start by telling about myself. So I'm a development economist. I work on agriculture and mostly on India. So I worked on macroeconomics, I worked on education, I worked on agriculture. I've been working on India for the last 30, 40 years. And most recently, I work on project with farmers in Karnataka, and also I collaborate with the director of Giri Institute, Pramod Kumar. So, what are we going to talk today? We know that Amrit Kal has really started in India, and I give you a perspective from outside India. And I visit India every year. And during the COVID time, I could not visit. So when I went this time, that was in January. I saw a very drastic change, a complete transformation of India. And I do realize what the Prime Minister Modi ji says is the Amrit Kal, right? That has really started. And I will explain to you why I think it has started, though I don't live so much in India, but I just visit for a couple of days. But I do realize staying outside and visiting India once in a while, I see how India has really developed, and it is moving so fast. And I think by 2030, it will be the third largest economy in the world after the United States and China. In that case, if India goes, I mean, in the past, if you see in the last 20 years, it has grown about 6%, which is very, very unusual. Of course, China did grow in a couple of years, about 6 or 7 percentage points. But India is growing, and it's continued to grow because of the recent reforms. So I'll highlight some of the key things that have really happened from the economics point of view. I would not touch politics at all because I'm very far from politics. So I'll give you a very balanced perspective of, and also a person from outside India and what he thinks about how things are going in India. So what is this Amrit Kal, which I think my interpretation is that India has done its reforms in 1991, and in the last 20 years, it has grown by 6%. So by 1930, it will be the third largest economy in the world. And by 1940, 45, 47, I think it will reach a per capita income of about 110 lakhs on an average. So which would be about 13,000 US dollars, which is an indication that India has crossed that boundary of 12,000 and odd US dollars to reach the developed economy. So that's why the Amrit Kal is really has started. And why I think that's kind of an idea, there are various sectors that I would highlight. First is the agriculture sector, where I have contributed a lot towards. And one of the issues that I looked at is land titling. And I do randomized control trials in Karnataka. I did this. And what we see is if the citizens have the land titles, especially the farmers have land titles, their productivity improves. There are a lot of things happening where poverty has reduced, and we see a lot of economic factors which are on the upper side. So issuing title is quite important, and in the digitalization of India, you will see that the land records are being digitalized, Aadhaar cards are being linked, IT, the income tax is also linked. So there is very less chance for corruption here, and there is a complete transformation. I started off this research in 2013. In India, 12 and 13. So at the time, I used to visit the local government offices in Gubi, and I never used to get response. We need to have a list of all the farmers. We never used to get a response. But when I visited very recently, everything has transformed. You see, all the clerks, all the officers are in the office by 8:30, right? So that's 8:39. But at the time, they are in office from 12 to 2 or so. Then in that time period, they have a lunch, then they have tea. So there is actually no activity happening in the government departments, but there is a complete transformation in my most recent visit. So that's one of the areas that I want to highlight, that the corruption has come down, and I think when you look at law and order, there is a lot of improvement compared to previous times when I visited India. So this is particularly in the agricultural sector, and there's also change from extension services where there is so much of corruption, people don't visit. So I think digitalization has taken over. So what you see is a digital extension services. So digitalization, electronics, software, all these are taking over across the world, but in India it's much faster. This is primarily because of the higher education, right? So if you see the last 10 years, the education sector has been privatized and engineering colleges come up. So it's really giving a boost to IT sector. And there's much of advancement machine learning and artificial intelligence are deployed across different sectors in India very recently. So I think there are a lot of prospects for India. The other one which I want to highlight is exports. Right? So there are two areas in which IT services and the BPO services constitute about 60% of the total exports. Right? And IT services is because of you have an excellent higher education where there is a good education system that we have in India, which you don't see in many parts of China is actually a competitor of India. And what is the advantage India has? It's youth, right? That's the key thing. 68% of the population are very young. So India is very young. And when you have a young population, it contributes to the economy very quicker and very faster. So that's the advantage that India has. And it's not just the population, it's not the youth population, but also the educated, the English speaking graduates. That's the key in India compared to China, because China is also a competitor. And most of the industries, most of the universities in UK, for instance, are looking to go away from China because we don't want to depend on just one country. And you see what's happening in China is that the economic growth is coming down, and there are a lot of issues with the political system there because they follow a different political system compared to India, which is a more a democratic country, which is more welcoming. So the investment are moving towards India. I think that's a big boost, and that's going to grow, and that's going to improve in several aspects, in several areas, especially on poverty. So if you look at the poverty in the last 10 years or so, the poverty has drastically come down, right? So we have lifted about 451 million people out of poverty. So that's a great achievement that India has seen in the last 10, 20 years, right? So there's also infrastructure, another area to really highlight. And infrastructure, if you see, there are new railway lines being developed. And we have about 148 airports now. But what you see by 1930, 2030, you will see that the number of airports will increase 230 to 240. That's the vision of the current government. I think that will boost a lot of tourism, that will boost a lot of remittances to India, and India is already exporting people. More recently with UK, they have a pact which is called the Migration and Mobility Pact, where about 10,000 about 1,000 skilled workers from India are invited to UK to work. But this has both sides, right? So India is producing all these educated people, spending a lot of money, but they are setting them outside. So their skills are being used or deployed in UK. But on the other hand, the remittances are going back to India. So there is so much of income which is flowing into India. So that has a multiplier effect and has a macroeconomic impact. So I think we need to really understand and all these factors, which is really supporting India's Amrit Kal. So the last point I think I would highlight, because there are two other speakers, and I would not go on and on, though I can. It's so interesting to really, and there are audience about 100 people who are participating. So I think we need to educate people that what's happening and the views from outside India. So the last point that I would like to highlight is the COP26, which happened in Glasgow, right? So since 1992, we have been affected by climate change. I don't know how many of the audience know about climate change, but what is happening is the global temperature is rising. So when the global temperature rises, it has a drastic change in terms of monsoon, seasonal shifts. And you see, across the globe, there are dramatic floods, and there is excess of too much ice, too much cold. So the everything changes. The natural calamities become more frequent. The heat waves. So it's very important that the more vulnerable countries are being affected in Africa. India is also affected. Certain parts of India is not that well developed yet, so they're also affected. So we need to worry about climate change. And it's a divide between the developed and the developing countries. So India being a leader in the developing country, so India, China, and Brazil, these are the three leaders. But India is outstanding in terms of the commitment to bring in the climate change. The whole debate about climate change is the blame game, because the developing country says that is the coal, is the fossil fuel resources which led to climate change. So we want to grow, but the developed country have really grown. So they want to really maintain their growth, but developing country has to grow. If we don't use coal, if we don't use fossil fuel resources, we are not going to grow. So that's the whole debate between the developing and the developed countries. Right? So India has really come out with real novel initiatives. It's saying we would go. Narendra Modi ji, the PM, who visited Glasgow, I think in 2021 for this conference, COP26, really pledged that India will really go to net zero by 2070. Although the target is 2050, but other developing countries like China and Brazil haven't really committed, but India has committed. And Narendra Modi ji had committed. And the key and the most important contribution is that the fossil fuel resources, the recognition that the coal has to be phased off, right? Not phased out. India is the only country which has brought this idea into the international sphere that coal has to be out at some point, but now it's a phase down. But this idea itself is novel, and this idea itself is the first time which is being brought into this debate about developed versus developing. So I will stop here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. So I stay here and take your questions if you have any questions. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Subramanian ji. Thank you for your insightful, beautiful address. And your first-hand information about boosting economy of India is really very enthusiastic. कई लोग हम लोगों के साथ जुड़े हुए हैं. अब प्रश्नों की एक तरह से मैं कहूँ तो झड़ी लग चुकी है. काफी प्रश्न आए हैं. The first question is to Arjunan Subramanian ji. The question is, on one hand, we see acute poverty, and on another hand, we have Ambani and Adani type of people. So how could we create balance?
Yeah, the inequality is a big issue. It's been an issue. And I think there are two ways to look at this. One is the increase in aggregate GDP, which is happening, and then distribution, right? So aggregate increase doesn't mean that it's distributed equally across different people. But in the last 20 years, and I pointed out that there are emphasis on education, on employment, and the training. I think the education is the key. And now what you see is a transformation in the rural areas. So the people that you see are going outside India and or being educated. I mean, it's an indicator because the people who come here, I see many of them are from rural areas, right? So the largest poverty is in rural areas, right? So when you see a transformation being happening through education, through higher education, and especially more technical education, we are really confident that the gap between the rich and the poor, the gap between Ambani and the very poor would be bridged over time. And these are the different dimensions that are highlighted when I spoke, which could lead to this. But it will take time. But by 2045, when we reach the peak of the Amrit Kal, then you see that this divide would just disappear. As you see in UK, you don't see the difference between rural and urban when you travel. You don't see that the difference between. That's because, but the transformation in India is slightly different from what's happening in the developed countries. It doesn't mean that the developed countries don't have poverty. अगर आप यहाँ पे भी देखेंगे तो poverty यहाँ पे भी है, right? So poverty is a global phenomenon. But जो इंडिया में जो transformation हो रहा है, that is slightly different from what happened in the developed countries, right? वहाँ पे grassroots जो संजीव निकल जी ने बोला है, and that is happening there, right? The transformation at the grassroots would take incomes to the very poor, and especially the health sector, जो मैं बता नहीं पाया, जो संजीव निचल जी ने highlight किया है, that is very important, because poverty जो poverty में जो important shock जो है वो है health shocks होता है mostly, and that's what is leading people to become very poor, because they lose income, they lose good nutrition, they lose good food. So there different dimensions are being affected, and when you are really supporting people at the health sector through the insurance, that has a huge impact. So if you see by 2045, when India becomes developed country, the development would be very different, like what you see the developed country in now. Like in the US, when you travel, you see a lot of poverty. But what you would see by 1945, given the trend, given the grassroots transformation that is happening, you would see, of course, Ambani is becoming more richer. I mean, the rich is becoming richer, but what is happening is that the poor are also overcoming their levels of poverty, right? And it also depends on how poverty is defined. I don't want to go into details because I think there are a lot of many questions that's waiting.
Thank you, Subramanian. And another question is in Hindi. विश्व के विकसित देशों की तुलना में भारत में जनसंख्या घनत्व अधिक है. भारत को विकसित देश बनने में आप भारत की जनसंख्या को कितनी बड़ी समस्या के रूप में देखते हैं? And this question is from Alok, research scholar.
आप इसको दूसरी तरफ से देखिए. It's not that population is disadvantaged every time, right? Population itself, if it's an educated population, अगर वो educated है और मैं हिंदी में I will try हिंदी में या मुझे हिंदी भी आती है अच्छी तरह. So population कोई गलत चीज नहीं है, बट अगर वो पॉपुलेशन एजुकेटेड है एंड इट्स इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज एजुकेटेड, तो दैट हैज एन एडवांटेज. जैसे आप बीपीओ देखेंगे तो यहाँ से अगर हम कॉल करते हैं तो जाता है, जैसे स्काई का कॉल किए या वोडाफोन का कॉल किए या बैंक का बार्कलेस का कॉल किए, फोन जब जाता है यहाँ से कोई भी टाइम पे अगर आप कॉल करें तो वहां पे आपको आवाज आती है और वो इतना अच्छा इंग्लिश बोलते हैं और आपकी समस्या सॉल्व करते हैं. जब उनसे पूछे आप कहाँ से हैं तो बोलते हैं पूना में हैं या गुड़गांव में हैं या चेन्नई में हैं. तो दैट्स एन एडवांटेज दैट आई सी. अगर यहाँ से मैं देखूं तो इंडिया में तो ये कहीं पे भी नहीं है. चाइना में जाता है, वो फैक्ट्री प्रोड्यूस करता है, पोल्यूट करता है. और ये जो बीपीओ का जो आप एडवांटेज है वो बिकॉज वो यूनिक है इंडिया के लिए. चाइना में अगर ऐसा वो नहीं है अभी, कभी कभी आप कॉल करें तो शायद इजिप्ट में भी जाता हूँ, राइट। बट इंडिया का जो पॉपुलेशन है, इट इज एन एडवांटेज विच आई सी, अगर मैं बाहर से देखूं, क्योंकि बट उसका दो साइड है। एक तो है कि आप एजुकेशन प्रोवाइड करते हैं, यू आर एजुकेटिंग पीपल इन आईआईटीज। अब अगर आप आईआईटी में भी देखें तो जो स्टूडेंट्स जो वहां पे आते हैं रूरल एरिया से आते हैं आजकल। पहला नहीं है, पहला जो था वो नहीं है अभी, क्योंकि ट्रेनिंग सेंटर्स अभी रूरल एरियाज में भी है, आ गए हैं। तो आईआईटी में आजकल जाना, इट्स नॉट वेरी डिफिकल्ट फ्रॉम द रूरल एरियाज। तो दैट्स एन एडवांटेज। और जो रूरल एरिया में एजुकेट किया, आईआईटी में आप इतना स्पेंड करते हैं, और एक इंजीनियर क्रिएट करा या और एक डॉक्टर क्रिएट करा, यू स्पेंड लॉट ऑफ मनी, राइट। बट वो क्या करते हैं, वो बाहर चले जाते हैं, तो यूके बेनिफिट्स फ्रॉम दैट। तो यूके इट्स वेलकमिंग दैट, क्योंकि अभी जो जब उन्होंने ईयू से निकल गए, ब्रिटेन केम आउट ऑफ ईयू, तो उनको वर्कर की जरूरत है, एजुकेटेड वर्कर की जरूरत है, एंड दे आर नाउ लुकिंग टुवर्ड्स इंडिया, राइट। तो अभी जब हमारे जो यूके के प्राइम मिनिस्टर, वो भी इंडियन है तो जो गए थे इंडिया, तो उन्होंने पैक्ट किया कि हम वी इनवाइट लॉट ऑफ स्किल्ड पीपल हियर, वी नीड स्किल्ड पीपल यहाँ पे, वी नीड पीपल टू डू लॉट ऑफ वर्क यहाँ पे। तो अगर लास्ट 2-3 years में देखेंगे तो देर आर मेनी पीपल हु हैव रियली कम हियर, सो वी टेक एडवांटेज ऑफ दैट। And India has an advantage कि they are producing those educated people and exporting, and in turn they get lot of remittances. So जो फॉरेन करेंसी है वो इंडिया में इंक्रीज हुआ है। और जब आप कोई इंपोर्ट करते हैं, कोई चीज इंपोर्ट करते हैं, तो आपको फॉरेन करेंसी में पे करना पड़ता है, राइट। तो जितना फॉरेन करेंसी इंडिया के पास है, दैट्स ग्रेट। सो इंडिया इज प्रोड्यूसिंग ऑल दोस एजुकेटेड पीपल, सो इट्स नॉट अ डिसएडवांटेज पॉपुलेशन। सो ये अंडरलाइन बॉटम लाइन थॉट मेरा।
ये प्रश्न बलिया के अनमोल गुप्ता का है, रिसर्च स्कॉलर। उन्होंने ये पूछा है, भारत के जनसंख्या और रोजगार में कैसे बैलेंस बनाया जा सकता है।
हाँ, तो देर इज एविडेंस कि 68% of the educated people in 2023 employed people of age category is rural, is youth, right? Educated youth. And I think that will increase. Education is the key. I think that would really improve people's employability. तो मेरे को कोई शक नहीं है कि जब आपका एजुकेशन सिस्टम विच वाज प्राइवेटाइज्ड बाय द वे, विच गिव अपॉर्चुनिटीज फॉर पीपल, प्राइवेट पीपल टू ओपन अप न्यू कॉलेजेस, स्पेशली इंजीनियरिंग एंड मेडिसिन, तो उसके कारण काफी स्किल्स is being provided to educated to the youth in India. And India is very young and it's going to be young. अगर आप इसको कंपेयर करेंगे डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज में, ईयू में देखेंगे, द पॉपुलेशन ऑफ द ओल्ड पीपल इज इंक्रीजिंग, राइट। सो इंडिया जो प्रोड्यूस करता है educated, skilled people, the demand from the world is much, much higher compared to what India is producing, right? इसीलिए जो यूके के जो प्राइम मिनिस्टर जब आए थे, तो उन्होंने साइन किया था एक मेमोरेंडम बिटवीन governments ki they will invite people for 2 years, people who are educated and who are able to invest here. So there is a lot of demand in the UK, there is a lot of demand in the US for skilled people, and India is producing. So आपको employment का कोई problem नहीं होगा जब तक you are educated. And these remittances which go back to India is being channelized in such a way that there are more industries, there are more investment happening. मैंने तो पूनम जी का एक किताब में लिखा था, and there was a chapter in that, and that tells you that there are a lot of investment happening in India, and employment is increasing. And that's very important that you see. So population increase is not bad as such, but जो educated population जो increase हो रहा है, that would really add to that will decrease the unemployment, and it's going in the right trend. I don't know the exact numbers of unemployment in India, but I think it's reduced drastically given these things.